Eccoci, continuiamo con questo ultimo pomeriggio di Nippop 2025 Into the Dark. Grazie ancora a tutti e a tutte per essere qui. E io do il benvenuto a Eddy Wertheim che arriva appunto da Londra e a Fusako Yoshinaga che in realtà lavora con lui. E Eddy è un esperto di arte, uno dei massimi esperti in Europa di arte e antiquariato giapponese e gestisce a Londra la Japanese Gallery Kensington, una galleria che è conosciuta ormai in tutta Europa proprio per la collezione raffinata e importante di opere che attraversano tutta in realtà l'arte giapponese che ha raccolto. Collabora spesso con musei e con mostre. In realtà Eddy, Fusako e io ci siamo conosciuti perché abbiamo collaborato per 2 mostre, la mostra dedicata agli Yokai che si è conclusa a novembre a Firenze al Museo degli Innocenti e la mostra dedicata allo Yoshinaga che in questo momento è a Roma presso i musei di San Salvatore in Lauro e rimarrà aperta fino al 7 di settembre. Quindi grazie Eddy per essere con noi, thank you Eddy for being here. Eddy ci porterà appunto di nuovo nel mondo dell'arte giapponese che abbiamo già un pochino toccato ieri e che quest'oggi abbiamo un po' abbandonato per occuparci di declinazioni più contemporanee. So thank you Eddy and the floor is yours. So.
Are we on? We're on. Wow. Okay. So first and foremost, Paola, thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you everyone here for being here. I know it's very hot and you've had loads of talks today, but thank you for being here for mine. So I was invited here to actually give a talk on a monk and a courtesan, but then I thought before I do, I should give you my take on yokai, seeing as yokai is the theme of today. So the theme around yokai is highly debatable, so I will give you my personal opinion on it, and as it is a university and educational program, it's always open to argument, always open to interpretation. So I hope this will be a nice way of having an open discussion about yokai. So just for a bit of fun, I would like to know what everyone thinks is a yokai. So ideally, you can either put your hand up or shout out yokai. So this, the lantern, Chochin bucket. Is this a yokai? Oh, no one's hand up. Oh, there we are. Yep, that is a yokai indeed. Next one, Nurikabe. Is this a yokai? Yes, yes, yes. Lovely, perfect, we're getting there. Next one, Kappa. Is this a yokai? Wonderful, wonderful. And the skeleton, is this a yokai? Fantastic. This is actually an anime kappa, just for a bit of fun. So yokais can come into anime characters as well. And bakeneko, is this a yokai? Indeed. And tengu, do we think this is a yokai? Oh, yes, indeed, it is a yokai. Be brave, be brave. And then finally, is this a yokai? Oh, fantastic. I agree with you as well. This for me is a yure. Now, because this is a yure, but very often when we go to exhibitions, and this happens also in Japan, not just in Europe or worldwide, but typically the terminology yokai is used, and when you go to the exhibition, there's essentially a yure there. So if we're going to be really pedantic, the correct terminology that we should be using is not yokai, and it should be obake. And obake is essentially the umbrella name for both categories. So today, our topic will be obake. So in today, we're going to do a quick definition of obake, the two distinct differences between yure and yokai, and then the history of obake stories, clarification and its purpose, and hopefully, if we have time at the end, a story about Ikkyu-san and Jikoku Daiyu. So to start off with the term obake. So this is loosely translates to change or to transform. And it can be supernatural, spirits, demons, monsters, and very often they can be evil traditionally, but also playful, helpful, and strange. And the strange part we'll cover a little bit later on. So for now, we've got Yokai, and this is an image by an artist by the name of Yoshitoshi, and this is a fox dressed as a monk. And then for Yure, we have an image here by Kuniyoshi, and this is a typical image of a ghost. So to start off with Yure, so how do Yures come about? So typically Yure is actually associated with humans who passed away. And very often in stories, there are two distinct types of yure. There are those which are love stories. So it could be a male or female who's passed away and they've got a loved one that's still alive and they're still longing for that love and they can't move on to the next life. And you also have another form where somebody has died under extremely bad circumstances and they're seeking revenge. And until they've had that revenge, again, they can't move on to the next life. So here we have a typical image of a yure, and this is actually done by Yoshinaga. And I don't know if any of you know the Japanese horror movie of The Ring. You do? Lovely, lovely, lovely. Perfect. Now, do you remember the scene, the very scary scene where she comes out of the TV screen? So that inspiration, you could say, comes all the way back to the traditions of ukiyo-e. Now, if you look at her hair very carefully, you can see it poking out of the frame as though it is actually coming out of the picture. So for me, I would say Sadako and The Ring has done that as an homage to traditional Japanese art. Here we have another image of a ghostly scene because typically ghosts tend to always show as women in Japanese culture for some reason. So here's a male figure. And here's another one by Yoshitoshi again. And typically with Japanese ghosts, they can actually be quite beautiful instead of horrific. Now, moving on to yokai. So for me, yokai, it was actually Gegege no Kitaro, which is the anime that really brought the whole yokai culture to life for me during my childhood. And within the realms of yokai, we have the kappa that we covered, nine-tailed fox, and also the tengu. It also includes inanimate objects. And inanimate objects can come to life within Japanese mythology. So it's often said that an object after 100 years will get its own soul and will come alive. And we see this still true today with the way people within Japanese culture look after each object that they possess. So these inanimate objects can be lanterns that come to life. It could be itanmomen, which is a silk or cloth that comes to life, and even umbrellas. And umbrellas, this yokai is quite a funny one because it appears on a very rainy day. And the way the story goes is if you're walking down the street on a very rainy day and you see an umbrella on the floor, now you've got a choice. You can either pick it up, brush it off, and see if it works. And if it does, fantastic. And in this case, this yokai will come to life and will shelter you from the rain and follow you all the way home. Now, on the opposite, if you kick it away or you ignore it, it will come to life, grab hold of you, and take you way up into the sky. And then after that, who knows what happens? So, they can be helpful and quite strange at the same time, and horrific, and all of the above. So, the history of obake. So, the trend of obake, really, its highest point of popularity is during the Edo period. And this time period in Japan, there wasn't a lot of warfare going on. So there was an abundance of money, wealth, the economy was doing fantastic. So quite rightly, during a time of peace, people will put their money into art, fashion, and entertainment. And entertainment would be things like kabuki plays. It would be literature. And I would say humans are quite a funny creature because on one hand, we don't like being scared, yet we all want to go to the cinema and watch a horror movie and be scared out of our mind. And especially during a time of peace, which is quite strange. But it's human nature to want to feel different emotions, whether that be love, hate, desire, even fear. And to have that sense of fear, but in the safety of your own home, is actually quite nice. And to feel emotions is important. And so even with graphical, horrific art, a lot of people will say, well, why would you want that? And it's to remind us to experience different emotions in our lives. And in this image that we see, this is actually a typical kabuki poster image that was used to promote a kabuki play. And here we have a woodblock print of a ghost lady. And here we have a bakekitsune, or a fox turning into human form and vice versa. And this is a kabuki actor dressed as a fox. And here we can see a lady walking, and then through the silhouette, you can see it's actually a fox. So for clarification, because at this point, I'm going to make things a little bit more confusing for everyone for a bit of fun. So for clarification, yokais, demons, obake are somewhat different depending on how they're depicted and what purpose they serve. So the nine-tailed fox in this situation would be considered a bakemono. And a yokai more specifically. But then a temple fox, I don't know if you've ever been to Japan, but at some temples or shrines, you'll see foxes as well. Now, these are not categorized as such. They are simply temple foxes looking after the temple and guarding it from evil. At the same time, in this, I don't know if you can see in the background, but there's foxes as well. Now, this is actually neither of the two. In this, if we zoom in carefully, these are actually called inari, and these foxes, their favorite food happens to be inarizushi as well. And they are considered deities. So in a way, for foxes, there are multiple different categories that they fall under. At the same time, here we have an image of a demon or a oni. And oni, again, it has a different category. If the oni is on our plane or in our realm, then they are considered as yokai. However, if they're depicted in a scene of hell, they're not. They are oni within that particular realm. So depending on the realm that they're depicted, changes what category they fall under. And again, in temples, it's typical to see things like shishi, phoenixes, and even dragons. And again, they're not yokai. So yokais have a very close link with Shintoism and Buddhism. And the reason why I say this is because the way the stories are told, and a lot of the stories which are told embody the ethos of both Shintoism and Buddhism in its own right, to respect the living and the deceased, to promote the idea of it's not just living beings that you look after, but also inanimate objects. So if I give you an example, during my uni days, I was in a dormitory, and I'm sure some of you had your own dorms at some point. And it was the day I had to leave and move to another place. And as I packed my bags, opened the door, and just as I was about to close it, I couldn't help myself but to pause and utter to the room, "Thank you for looking after me throughout my time here." And I bowed my head and slowly closed the door. Now, when I looked to my left, I saw my housemate looking at me going, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And he couldn't quite understand why I did that. And for me, it was to say thank you to the spirit of the room for it looking after me. Because I've heard stories of other students having leaks coming in, their electricity didn't work, and they had loads of, I didn't have any of those problems. It looked after me, and I wanted to show my gratitude. At the same time, it was also me showing my gratitude to the builders who put the whole place together, the electrician, the plumber. It was to say thank you to them, but obviously I couldn't do it in person, so the only way I could do it was to say thank you to the room. So I'm sure even for yourselves, you've got your favorite jacket, your favorite watch, whatever it may be, it's important to you. And to either lose it, or once the jacket is worn out and you have to throw it away, you kind of lose a little bit of yourself in a way, but to save that, you say your final thank you to it. And it makes it easier to part ways. And essentially with this, it reminds us about the importance of respect, honor, and also to be brave. And with that being said, let's move on to the story of Ikkyu-san and Jikoku Daiyu. So, hold on. Ikkyu-san, the story of Ikkyu-san was actually made really popular during my childhood as an anime and manga, and that's how most people recognize it. In actual fact, the legend of Ikkyu-san goes back centuries. And back then, Ikkyu-san typically was always depicted with a skull. He would always carry a skull around with him. And the legend of Ikkyu-san and Jikoku Dayu actually starts off with one of the biggest battles that ever took place in Kyoto. And this battle was known as Oni no Ran. And in this battle, there was a samurai by the name of Umezu Kageharu. And unfortunately, this samurai was killed during this battle. And word got back to his family, and they were told to run away as fast as they could because the enemy was fast approaching. So the mother grabbed hold of her 2 children, ran through the forest as fast as they can to try and get to the next village to safety. But on their way, they were surrounded by bandits. And as the bandits circled around them, unfortunately, the mother was killed. The 2 children were separated and sold off. The youngest of the 2 was called Otoboshi, and she was sold to a geisha house. And she spent her childhood learning about music, dance, poetry, literature. But she would spend every day remembering the childhood that she had, the life that she had, and now the life that she had to live. And she felt that she was damned or punished for a sin that she committed in her past life. And as such, she decided to change her name to the Hell Courtesan, Jikoku. And she also changed her fashion. So all of her kimonos would always be the theme of hell. And for that reason, I like to believe that she would be the first goth of Japanese history. Now, she was extremely popular and talented beyond belief, and she became famous throughout. And she became number 1 within the place that she worked. And to become number 1, you get given a title called Daiyu. And once you're given that title, it means you essentially can choose your client and decide when you wanted to work. That was how much power she had. And from that point on, she would be forever known as Jikoku Daiyu. One day, as she was resting in her room, she heard a commotion happening outside. So she wandered outside to see what all of this commotion was about. And what she saw was a monk trying to come in. And everyone was trying to stop him, saying, no, you can't come in, you're a monk. What are you doing? But Jikoku Daiyu was intrigued. So she went up and said, no, it's okay, let him in. And this person was Ikkyu-san. And she brought Ikkyu-san into the room and said, what would you like to eat and drink? And Ikkyu-san turned round to her and said, I'd like sake and fish, please. And Jikoku Daiyu, trying to keep a straight face, was actually in shock because monks aren't meant to eat fish. They're vegetarians. She felt it was such an oddity. Which, in any case, she called round to the other girls to get them to come and assist with the entertainment and brought Ikkyu-san his food. And as she sat next to him, she saw him eating away, drinking away, and then Ikkyu-san, in all of his excitement, got up and started dancing away with all the ladies. And Jikoku Daiyu just sat there. And she got up out of her seat and decided, I've had enough, and walked out, opened the shoji screen, closed it behind her, and walked away. But as she turned round to look, she saw through the silhouette Ikkyu-san dancing, but with silhouettes of skeletons around him. And she was shocked. So she went back, opened the screen doors to look at what was happening, to only realize that there were no skeletons. All the girls were there as normal, and it was just Ikkyu-san playing away. So she closed the screens, went back to her room, and rested that very evening. Now, during that evening, she suddenly heard footsteps down the corridor. And she looked across and saw Ikkyu-san. And she was wondering what he was doing. And he was walking through the gardens to the pond, and he started to throw up. And as he threw up, the food that he had eaten that evening came to life. The koi carp started to swim in the water. At that point, Jikoku Dayu realized Ikkyu-san was no ordinary monk. He was something different. So the very next morning, Jikoku Dayu went to Ikkyu-san's room and confided in him. And she told him about what had happened in her life and why she became what she is. And he consoled her and said to her, in this life, we are nothing but flesh on bones. It is our spirit that defines us. No possession, no status, no beauty, nor sex. When we die, we are all the same skeletons. She then asked him, I want to be a monk. I want to be your disciple. Ikkyu-san looked at her and said, no. She looked back and said, why not? And Ikkyu-san simply said, there are too many monks who are monks for the wrong reason, who are charlatans, who think by being a monk they can become something different. And he said quite simply, for you, you are talented as you are, but I will give you a chair and a hoso. And a hoso is, it looks like a very large brush which has hairs on it, and it's essentially used to brush away or swat away small, tiny flies. And essentially it's to remind us not to hurt or kill any small creature, large or small, no matter what. So she took this chair and meditated every evening and carried on with her life. And soon she actually found acceptance of her life, found inner peace, and also enlightenment. But unfortunately, she fell gravely ill, and she knew she was about to die soon. So she called on her assistants to ask Ikkyu-san to come and visit her. And Ikkyu-san came with his assistant disciple. And as they came and visited Jikoku Dayu, she got up with her last bit of strength and entertained the both of them with music and poetry, and then went to rest. At that point, Ikkyu-san's assistant came to look after her in that last moment, to only reveal that he was actually her brother that was separated. And at that moment, Jikoku Dayu, finally reunited with her brother, was finally truly at rest, and that evening passed away. In the morning, as they moved her body, under her pillow, there was a note that was left that said, "Please leave my body in the field." And so they did as she wished. They left her body in the field. Several days went by, and Ikkyu-san went to visit where her body once was. And he saw the bones on the floor, and he picked up her skull. And as he did, he realized all her bones had fused together as one continuous skeleton. At that point, he realized that Jikoku Dayu was no ordinary person. So he took her remains and gave her a traditional burial. At that point, 7 bright stars appeared from her remains and shot way up into the sky. And that is the tale of Ikkyu-san and Jikoku Dayu. Now, for me, there are many different ways that we can interpret stories, and we can learn from these stories. For me personally, the learning process was, we all encounter hardship in our lives. We all wish for a certain life that we don't have today. And especially with social media and people doing Instagram, Facebook, X, whatnot, we watch it and they only show the good things about their lives. And we look at that and we all think, oh, I wish I had that life. I'm not happy with mine. But the truth is, they're only showing you a glimpse. We all have hardship in our life, but it's all about how we overcome it, accept what we have, but treasure the life that we actually have, the soul that we have. That is what defines us, what we do with our own lives, no matter what happens, because these hardships, it's out of our control. What is in our control is to accept it and move forward with our lives. And with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddy, for your inspiring talk, and grazie, quindi grazie e grazie a tutti per l'attenzione. Abbiamo, direi, qualche minuto per qualche domanda. Please.
Hi. So I was wondering, how would you define the more modern creatures born from, urban legends? How do you think they build upon these folkloristic characters and their legacies?
So the funny thing is, we see yokais appearing in anime, manga, all the time. So even in Pokemon, if you go through the different Pokemon characters, a lot of them are just characters. But there are actually 1 or 2 that are inspired from real traditional Japanese urban legends. And I think with that, there are always new ways of telling stories. And as long as it embodies the importance of teaching us how to care for one another, how to respect one another, and overcome challenges in our lives. I think that's the most important thing. So even with movies that have horror stories within them, if we take, let's say, The Ring, for example, as a horror movie, even that in itself is, for me, the way I translate it is, we all know that if you watch the video, then you're going to be condemned to death unless you make somebody else watch it. But if you do that, then you're also complicit in that killing in a way. But at the same time, part of it is she's done that because you've seeked entertainment through her sadness. And I think that's quite disappointing, because we also see that today in social media, where everyone writes horrible comments about different people, and it's very easy to do that. And even with businesses, if something goes wrong with a business, we're all very quick to put bad comments, bad reviews. But how often do any of us actually write good reviews whenever we visit a good place? It's very rare we do that. We're very easy to write negativity constantly. But I think the importance is actually to be positive to one another. So these teachings of the past still, I think, if any, is more important that we have that today, especially in this time where negativity is so prevalent within social media. And also the news. How often do you see good news on the news? Everything's quite horrific. And I think a little bit of positivity takes us to a better place.
Ok, thank you. Ci sono altre domande? Prego.
Sorry. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I was able to attend only on the last 10 minutes, so I hope I didn't miss that much, but I'm very much happy that I was able to catch the tale that you were saying. I wanted to ask, I saw on the website in your collection, you have the Japanese no masks, and I'm actually using one of them as items for a uni project. And I wanted to ask, I know, as far as I know, they try to portray the beauty, the elegance of the people portrayed in those. Are they trying to tell stories like Jigoku Daio's ones, or do they have some other significance in them?
So on the no plays, it's slightly different, but there is actually one no mask. I don't know if many of you know, but it's the Hanya. It's the one with the horns. Yes. Any of you seen those? So that Hanya mask is actually also a horror story and a love story in a way. So that one is actually a young lady who is deeply in love with this man, but she can't have him because his love is already taken by another person. But that desire to want him is so strong that she grows horns and almost chases after him. But that particular mask is actually very cleverly made. So if you tilt it up, it's actually smiling. If you tilt it down, it's actually frowning. So the way I interpret that mask is she's happy that she is near him, but also sad that she can't have him. So it's a variety of different emotions that's actually coming through the mask. So next time you see it, give it a tilt and you can see this evil smile and also this sort of solemn, depressed look that she's longing to have him but can't.
I don't have a physical one to actually see, but I will try to catch that on the website or on any museums. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Eddy. Thank you again. E grazie a tutti per essere stati qui.